Gary Player is 90 years old. 9 majors, 163 tournament victories worldwide, the most traveled athlete in the history of professional sport. And yet behind everything he built, behind the Black Knight who conquered the world, is a story of loss so profound and so persistent that it has followed him from his earliest days all the way to this very moment. Here's the full story. To truly understand what Gary Player has endured, you have to resist the temptation to start with the trophies. You have to start with a little boy in Johannesburg, South Africa, and with the loss that shaped every single thing that followed. Gary Player was born on the 1st of November, 1935, the youngest of 3 children. His father, Harry, worked underground in the gold mines of South Africa, the kind of exhausting, dangerous labor that left almost nothing in the tank when the day was done. And when Gary was still a small child, his mother Muriel died. He grew up without her, raised largely at boarding school, without the presence that most children take for granted. The drive, the obsession, the relentless need to prove himself that made Gary Player one of the hardest workers in the history of golf, all of it has its roots in that earliest loss. He has spoken throughout his career about how deeply his mother's absence shaped him, how it pushed him to fill that void with achievement. The trophies, the fitness, the discipline, the refusal to ever quit, were in many ways a young boy's answer to a world that had taken something irreplaceable from him before he was old enough to understand what it meant. And so he threw himself into golf with a ferocity that the sport had never quite seen before. He turned professional at 17, almost entirely self-taught, with a swing that experts constantly warned him would never hold up at the highest level. He ignored them and went to work. Gary Player was not the most naturally gifted golfer of his era, but he became one of the most successful, entirely through discipline, fitness, and a will to win that bordered on obsession. He was the first truly global golfer, the first to understand that to be great you had to compete everywhere, not just at home. He is estimated to have traveled more than 15 million miles over the course of his career, circling the globe more times than almost any human being in history. He played in South Africa, Europe, Asia, America, Australia, winning on every major tour on the planet, and 9 major championships came with all of it. 3 Masters titles, in 1961, 1974, and 1978. 2 PGA championships, a US Open, 3 Open championships. He became only the 3rd player in history to complete the career Grand Slam, winning all 4 majors, joining Ben Hogan and Gene Sarazen in that rarefied company. Alongside Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, he formed the Big Three, the trio that dominated golf for a generation and turned it into a global sport. He was small by the standards of golf, just 5 feet 6 inches, and he played in all black, at a time when the game was all pastels and cardigans. The Black Knight, the name fit perfectly. And throughout all of it, he played against a backdrop of political fury that no golfer before or since has had to navigate quite as he did. South Africa's apartheid system meant that Gary Player competed internationally as a target. He was booed. He was protested. At the 1969 US Open, demonstrators threw ice and garbage at him on the course. He had to be escorted by security at tournaments. The world directed its fury at the most visible South African it could find, and that was the man in black winning golf tournaments. The situation was genuinely complicated. In his early career, Player made statements that were read as supportive of apartheid, something he deeply regrets and has long acknowledged. His views changed fundamentally. By 1987, he called apartheid a terrible system and a cancerous disease, said the government had pulled the wool over everyone's eyes, and expressed his happiness at seeing it end. But the years of carrying that weight, of competing while being booed, of representing a nation the world had rightfully condemned, left marks that went far beyond golf. He never stopped coming. He never stopped competing. He kept walking out onto those fairways even when the crowds wanted him gone. That stubbornness, that refusal to yield, is both the most admirable thing about him and the thing that cost him endlessly. But that 15 million miles came at a cost that Gary Player has never minimized. It meant Vivienne, his wife, was raising their 6 children almost entirely alone. It meant birthdays missed, school plays missed, ordinary moments that add up to a childhood. Vivienne Verwey had been Gary's childhood sweetheart. He asked her to marry him when he was 15 years old. She said yes. They married in January of 1957, and for 64 years she was the foundation on which everything he built was resting. She traveled with him when she could, tutoring their children on the road. She stood at the back of galleries in countries she could barely speak the language of and watched her husband chase history. She made the sacrifice of the road feel like a partnership, rather than an absence. He has said he could not have achieved any of it without her. Quick pause. If Gary Player is one of the greatest golfers who ever lived in your eyes, type Black Knight in the comments. If his story moves you in a way that goes beyond the trophies, type legend. I read every single one. And then in June of 2020, Vivienne was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She and Gary had just celebrated 63 years together. The diagnosis arrived in the middle of a global pandemic, in the middle of a bitter family legal dispute that was already tearing his world apart, and it was the cruelest news he had received since his mother died all those decades ago. Pancreatic cancer is one of the most aggressive and unforgiving diagnoses in medicine. For 14 months, Gary watched the woman he had loved since he was a teenager fight and decline and fight again. He held her as she died on the 18th of August, 2021. He released a statement that said something no list of achievements or trophies could ever come close to. He said he could not describe the deep sense of sadness he felt at having lost the one person who had always meant the world to him. He said Vivienne had raised their children almost single-handedly while he traveled the world playing golf. He said she was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a wonderful human being who cared deeply for others. He said she taught him the value of love and faith and trust, and that he would be eternally grateful that he was holding her when she left. 64 years of marriage, childhood sweethearts, gone. And if that were the whole of it, it would already be more than enough to break anyone. But the tragedy of Gary Player at 90 does not end with Vivienne. Because while he was grieving the greatest loss of his personal life, he was also fighting a battle that should never have to be fought by any man at any age. A battle with his own family, over his own legacy. His eldest son Mark had served for years as the executive head of Black Knight International, the company that managed Gary's business interests. The relationship deteriorated badly. In 2020, a court awarded Gary $5 million and the rights to his own name and likeness back from a company Mark operated, after unpaid royalties going back to 2014. That alone should have been the end of it. It was not. In 2022, Gary discovered that his son had put several of his trophies and pieces of memorabilia up for auction, items that belonged to Gary and that he had never agreed to sell. His 1974 Masters Tournament trophy, his South African Open trophy, Rolex watches. Memorabilia held in 19 lockers at a storage facility in South Carolina that were being quietly offered to buyers. Gary released a public statement, the words of a man who had spent a lifetime winning things and could not believe what was being done with them. He said the items belonged to him and that he had taken action to recover them. He said simply, "I won the trophies, not him." A court issued an injunction, temporarily blocking further sales and requiring proceeds to be held in a trust. The legal fight, between a father and his son, over the physical objects that represent the greatest achievements of his life, has dragged on ever since. It was not the only public humiliation from within his family. His son Wayne, who had a brief and unsuccessful professional golf career, was arrested at Augusta National during the 2018 Masters Week on fraud charges related to bad checks. 3 years later, during the 2021 Masters, as Augusta National paid tribute to the legendary Lee Elder, a pioneer of black golf in America, Wayne held up a sleeve of golf balls as a marketing stunt during the first tee ceremony, hijacking one of the most dignified moments in recent major championship history. The embarrassment to his father was total. So this is where Gary Player stands at 90 years old. His mother died before he was old enough to know her properly. He spent his career pouring himself into a sport that required him to be away from his family for months of every year. His beloved wife of 64 years is gone. His own name and trophies have been the subject of years of litigation with his own son and grandson. Arnold Palmer, his partner in the Big Three, died in 2016. The era he dominated has been gone for decades. And he carries all of it with the same quiet determination that carried him through everything else, still appearing publicly, still sharp, still standing. That is both the most inspiring and the most heartbreaking thing about Gary Player. The same quality that made him one of the greatest golfers who ever lived, the absolute refusal to be defeated, has also meant he has had to endure more than his share of loss and betrayal without ever being able to simply lay down and rest. He fought his way out of a fatherless boarding school childhood, fought his way to 9 majors on every continent, fought his way through protests and booing crowds, fought his way through 64 years of separation and sacrifice. And now, at 90, he is still fighting, this time in courtrooms over trophies that should simply belong to the man who won them. The tragedy of Gary Player is not that he failed. The tragedy is everything it cost him to succeed, and how little protection all of that success has offered when the hardest moments arrive. He gave the game his entire life. He gave it his body, his health, his family time, his miles. And in return, he won more than almost anyone, lost the woman he loved, and spent his final years fighting his own flesh and blood over the evidence of what he achieved. At 90, the Black Knight is still standing, but the weight of everything he carries, the grief, the betrayal, the loneliness of outliving almost everyone who shared his era, is something no trophy case can hold. If this one moved you, drop a like before you scroll away. It tells the algorithm to push these stories to the people who should see them. And subscribe if you want more of these, the kind that look past the trophies to the real story underneath. There are more coming.